Good evening all, and welcome. Houses, for the most part, are places of comfort and respite, and probably where most of us are now, due to the current pandemic. However, there are some abodes that harbour additional guests that may or may not ever leave its walls. So it's time for you to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. About 8 years ago, when I was a senior in high school, me and two of my very close friends decided to break into this house that was down a back road that we passed every day to go to one of their houses after school. The house was kept up, but no one had lived there in over 10 years at the time. And by kept up, I mean the lawn was mown and the lights were always on. It was pretty well known in the community that no one lived there, but the bills were paid by someone, and no one had lived there in years. So being teenagers, we decided to check it out after dark. There was a driveway that led to a covered garage in the back of the property that couldn't be seen from the road. We pulled in just after 11 p.m. and made our way back to the garage, and we parked. The entrance was clear, and there wasn't a soul around. Since the garage was behind the house, we made our way to the back entrance of the house and noticed there was a plywood slab that covered the back door's windowed top half. We proceeded to pry the cover off the door and revealed that the windows had been broken before, probably by another group of teens in the past, and we had our entrance. Once we climbed through, each helping the last through the window and into what was the kitchen at the back of the house. Once in the kitchen, we moved to the eerily tidy living room of the house, which was sort of infamous for being the room in the house with the lights on. There were magazines all dated to 1998, stacked neatly on the table in the middle of the room, and it was fairly clear that an elderly woman had once been the occupant. There was a sewing station and decor to suggest this. We felt safe at this point. We had made it in there, and there weren't neighbors or anything for half a mile in either direction. We sat around for about a half hour, freestyle rapping, laughing, and smoking a joint. We toured the rest of the house and ended up back in the living room. It was overall pretty creepy, but pretty typical too. Just seemed like a normal household that hadn't been changed in 15 years. This is where it gets weird. We were still cutting up in the living room, and had actually turned the lights off because we were filming each other with my Lenovo laptop, something we did for fun all the time back then, so we could relive it and show our friends that we had braved the empty house on the back road. When all of a sudden, there was a sound like an old guttural truck trying its hardest to stay idling. The uneven rumble of an engine. It's hard to explain. I personally thought for a split second it was the air unit's fan outside the living room wall, or something along those lines. We froze in place and looked around at each other in the dark. Terrified faces stared back at me, illuminated by the glow of the laptop. After 10 seconds of the rumble, there was a squeak, and a heavy truck door slammed shut right outside the living room wall. Now we scrambled. No hesitation, we bolted for the front door that also connected to the living room, because climbing through that back door window would have been difficult in a panic, but the front door had actually been nailed shut. So we turned and ran to the other side of the house, in the back bedroom that was also on the back side of the house. We all three froze and didn't move a muscle. The engine rumble wasn't audible anymore, but we were trapped like mice. There were huge bushes covering every window, and the front door was nailed shut. The only way out was the way we had come in, but we were literally scared motionless. We sat in the bedroom waiting for the police or owner or someone to call out that our fun is over and to come out, but that never happened. There was a window to the backyard in our hiding spot, covered by a huge bush. I personally was directly next to it. My buddies very close to me, almost huddled around me. They could see and hear everything. And let me remind you that after the slam of the truck door, it was absolutely silent inside and out, besides us scrambling to the back. All of a sudden, chills go up my arm and back, and I slowly turn my head to my friends, who looked like they were about to keel over from fright. Footsteps in crunching leaves were coming, slowly, directly to the window that we were hiding behind. They stopped as close as they could, without walking directly into the bush, and we froze again. The footsteps we heard approaching the window were undoubtedly bipedal. After the steps stopped outside the window, we were immobilized with fear for nearly a minute, maybe more. We sat there waiting for the steps to depart or someone to call out at us, which never happened. The steps stopped outside the window and never moved. Only then did we silently agree. It was time to back out the room slowly, as we were horrified by what exactly could be staring towards us in this window. And at that moment we threw caution to the wind. We got up, slowly backpedaled away from the window and made our way into the hallway outside the room, and into the area before the kitchen where our exit was now back in sight. I think all three of us knew that something was very wrong about all of this, and I think getting caught by the police or the owner wasn't on any of our minds. This was very surreal and felt almost like a prank, because there's no way people of authority would be haunting us in the way whoever was outside had been doing. So fed up of what felt like an eternity of unease and terror, we decided to bolt to the window in the door in the kitchen all at once and go out together, to either face what had been tormenting us or run. Once we were outside, we counted down from 3 and ran past the huge bushes to the left where our stalker had been. I couldn't help it. I had to turn around and look. I turned, and all I saw were the lights beaming from the window broken up by the bush and illuminating a patch of ground covered in what appeared to be undisturbed leaves. This made my whole body crawl in a way I've never felt before or honestly after. We made it to my car in the garage, and I backed out and tore away as fast as I ever had. There was no vehicle outside. There wasn't anything. There was a deafening silence and stillness. We are still very uneasy talking about it to this day. Even writing this makes my eyes water and my skin crawl. I've always been a man of science and a huge skeptic, but I can't explain that night. There was something so wrong about everything. Needless to say, we never went back. My husband and I bought a townhouse back in September of 2017, and we've had super weird things happen since. Most of these experiences have happened on our second story. For background, where the stairs come up to my office is immediately to the left. Then there is a long hall to the right with the hallway bathroom. The laundry room just past that is my son's room on the other side, and the master bedroom at the very end of the hall. The access to the attic is in the master bedroom closet. As our family goes, it's me, my husband, our son, and our 2 large dogs. When we first moved in, our son was barely 3 years old and had just started making full sentences. He would be playing all day without any issues, but whenever it started to get dark outside, he began getting nervous and wouldn't want to be in his room. He'd come downstairs at one point saying, "Mummy, do you hear it?" "Hear what, kiddo?" "The baby's crying, Mummy." My son is an only child, so you can imagine my confusion at this time. I came upstairs with him and asked him where he was hearing it from, thinking he may be hearing the neighbors through the wall. He took my hand and pulled me towards the master bedroom, stopping just a short over the threshold. He pointed to the darkest corner of the room and said, "Over there. The baby's crying over there." My body went numb. I tried to brush it off and told him there's no baby there and he's just imagining it. This persisted for about a month before he finally stopped talking about the crying baby. During this time I had been doing research on our house, and there had been no deaths in that house that I could find, let alone any kids that lived in the house before us. A few weeks after my son stopped mentioning the baby, I started hearing scratching noises above my head in the attic. I told my husband and he thought we had raccoons or some other animal living in the attic. He went up a few days later, but found nothing. I'm normally a heavy sleeper, but at least twice a week I would wake up to hear a faint scratching noise directly above me. I did my best to try and ignore it and go back to sleep. This seemed to work as we hadn't had an issue for a while up until recently. I have always felt somewhat uneasy on the second floor, but I just attributed it to my past paranormal experiences growing up and being a little paranoid. Now, I'm thinking my senses were on point. A few months ago, my husband and I were talking about how our son had this weird affinity for the crying baby when he was younger, and I had mentioned that one day when I was taking a nap, I woke up abruptly, being sideways on the bed with one leg hanging off towards the closet, almost like I was being dragged towards it. However, I don't remember being pulled at all. All I do is flop around a lot in my sleep, so I brushed it off. After I told my husband about this, he frowned a little bit and said he had a weird experience too recently. Apparently, he woke up one morning around 2:30 a.m. and saw a figure standing by his side of the bed. He said it was all black, and he couldn't really make out a face or any distinct features. He went to kick the figure, thinking maybe someone had broken into the house, and his foot went right through it. This freaked him out a little bit, but he's a firm believer that if you don't acknowledge paranormal things, they can't do anything. So of course he rolls over and goes to sleep, and doesn't even think to mention it to me until I told him about my own experience. The whole time we've been here, the dogs will randomly get spooked or will stare at something that I don't see. Every once in a while, our wolf hybrid, who's typically scared of his own shadow, will get very upset, and his hair will stand on end, and he will emit a low but vicious growl. Our other dog is a Malinois/Black Lab mix, but she's getting old and is 10 years old now, and doesn't really do much other than sleep on her bed and try to get all the pets and treats from us. And this brings us to the present. Yesterday there was a decent storm that came through our area. It was semi-dark out, and thunder every once in a while. I'm working from home during the virus pandemic, and my mum had come to pick up my son around 11:30 so that I could work in peace without my son continually bothering me. A few hours later, I'm listening to a podcast while working, and I hear a faint mumble that almost sounded like, "Mummy?" The chilling thing is that it sounded exactly like my son. I turned around to tell him that he needed to go back to his room and not bother me while I was working. But as I was turning, I remembered he wasn't even home. I was here alone with the dogs. There was no one behind me, and no one down the hall. At this point, I try to brush it off, thinking my mind is playing a trick on me, when my wolf hybrid starts losing it. All his hair stands on end. He gets between me and the door and starts doing this low growl. This freaked me out a little bit, but I told him to stop, which he listened to, and laid back down but without taking his eyes off the hallway. About an hour later, I was in the zone with work and was talking to a co-worker on our team chat. They sent me something funny enough to make me audibly laugh. I then heard a tiny giggle that sounds exactly like my son coming from his room down the hall, who still isn't home at this point. I nearly fall out of my chair with how scared I was. I got up and checked all the rooms upstairs, but I was home alone like I had thought. I had to get back to work as we were starting to get busy, but I was on edge and straining to hear if anything else was happening behind me. 10 minutes later, I hear the crash of something relatively small but still loud downstairs. My dogs run down the steps while I follow behind them. My PlayStation controller, which was originally on the charging stand behind the TV, was in the middle of the living room floor. This made my blood run cold, as we had not had anything physically moved yet, and I was having a full-blown panic attack. I called my husband, who was already on his way home, and said he would be there soon. When he got home, everything seemed to have stopped. This all happened from 2 to 4:30 in the middle of a little thunderstorm. I've looked into it, and from what I can gather, when something can mimic voices, it's typically evil or demonic. Should I be worried? What do I do in this situation? I don't want to scare my son, and we can't move, but I'm extremely paranoid and scared to be home alone right now. I had been experiencing many strange sounds and feelings last year. My cousin had a party at my house, and without my knowledge had brought a Ouija board and played it. Keep in mind that my room is in the basement, and every sound in the house can be heard from there. Most of the time I can tell exactly what it is. It was just me, my mum and sister, and 2 dogs in the house. I'd been hearing loud footsteps all around the house, mostly when it was just me home, and they were heavy, like a man's footsteps. Too heavy to be my mum or my sister, and I began to smell this rancid smell floating around the house. I'll be downstairs cleaning the basement, and it'll pass by me so suddenly, I had actually thought I made it up. Then I'd be anywhere else in the house, and I'll just settle for a few minutes, and it'll pass by once again. This strange occurrence happened for several weeks. Then it progressed to random objects flying off the shelves at one point, and a cup almost hit me as I was walking past my bookshelf. 2 months after the first incident, I started seeing a dark, shadowy silhouette in the basement just across from my room. Now, I'm not one that scares easily, but after so many weeks of these incidents, I had increasingly become more and more paranoid, and so seeing it for the first time, I was so scared. I couldn't shut my door fast enough. It was like that every night, seeing it in the same spot. Soon enough, I began to see it all around my house, down the hallway, in the dining room, and despite being afraid, I tried to ignore it, because if I didn't feed into what it wanted, it couldn't hurt me, or so I thought. About 2 to 3 weeks after seeing it for the first time, I had woken up with a scabbing and scratching sensation down my back. Slight bruising as well. That was the only case of there ever being anything physical. Sometime after that, I had a dream involving the entity. In the dream, I was standing on the dock, watching the water, when I noticed a child standing at the end of it. The little boy fell in, and I had run to him, jumping in the water after him. But all I saw was the child being dragged under. Only its eyes were dark and hollow. It was like big pools of dark ink. Then as I'm trying to grab for him, I had this feeling of dread. Then I'm grabbed and faced with the same entity. Only this time I can actually see its face, pale and white, with the same black eyes like empty sockets, its face stuck in this silent scream. As I woke up, I had sleep paralysis and started going through some of the steps I have to do to get out of it. After that, the incident slowly died away, until finally I had a friend of mine cleanse the house and do a blessing. Ever since then, I haven't had any more occurrences. I'm just not sure how to make sense of all of this. My sister, age 12, recently came to me and described feeling uncomfortable in certain areas of the house. and said she'd been seeing the same dark silhouette of the same woman that I used to see. She also has been having nightmares of this entity watching her sleep and following her around. I still have not had any more experiences. I was wondering what anyone thought about why she's suddenly being affected after so long. I lived in eastern Kentucky my whole life. I grew up way back in the holler, the last house on the road deep in the woods. I lived with my grandparents the majority of my childhood, and if I wasn't there, I was next door at my mum's house. Those woods have always given me a creepy feeling. I have felt stuff watch me. I have felt things touch me. I've seen stuff that I can't explain. When I lived with my grandparents, I would sleep with my mama. My papa slept in the other bedroom because they both snored really loudly and would keep each other up. My grandma's bed was right beside the window facing the woods. My side of the bed was right along next to the window. And in the summer, she would keep up the blinds and open the screen on the window and turn on the fan on high. Kentucky summers are extremely hot and humid. I remember many nights laying there and not being able to close my eyes because I would feel something watching me from the woods. I would lay there and stare into the darkness, hoping that I wouldn't see whatever it was and that it would go away. I would lay there for hours at a time. My whole family would see little small figures dart around the house, across the hall from bedroom to bedroom. My mum has witnessed a lot in this house. One morning my grandpa had taken my mama to work. She would go in at around 6:30 a.m. She never got her driving license, so my pup had always taken her to and from wherever she needed to go. My mum was getting ready for work that morning and thought Papa had come home from town. She said, "That was quick," but he didn't reply. She said she heard him rustling through the cabinets like he does every morning, working on making coffee, and she said she even heard him spit in his spit bottle. My papa had chewed tobacco for as long as I can remember. She heard the recliner being opened and went into the living room, but no one was home. She left for work as soon as possible after that. Living in the double-wide we had beside my grandma, I would sleep with my mum most of the time. The heat never circulated very well to the other side of the trailer for some reason, and in the winter it would get really cold. Her bed was facing the master closet and master bathroom, and my side of the bed faced the master bathroom. I can't tell you how many times I'd seen this, but I would see a woman sitting in the bathroom floor in the fetal position. She would be crying and would look up at me every now and then. I would tell my mum about it, but she would just tell me to go back to sleep. The nights I would sleep in my bedroom, I would see what looked like little trolls in my closet scampering around. I would shut the closet door, but by morning it would be ajar. That property, the woods, and land have something on it. May it be an Indian burial ground or whatever. But being up there after dark now as an adult, I still feel stuff watching me. Some stories my grandpa told me from the 50s. He's the super religious type. The type that if he's telling a story and he messes up one fact, he'll soon correct it and say, "Lord forgive me." So I know for a fact these are the God's honest truth. My papa grew up in a one-room house here in the country, not too far from where I grew up. Him and his brother, my uncle, were around 15 or 16 and were sitting on the back porch of their house just talking and laughing, probably drinking coffee. He swears on his life that up in the sky, maybe 500 feet, a 3-paneled door appeared, not in cloud form but an actual door. He said the door was white and had a small lit lantern at the bottom of the door. He watched it for hours as it just sat there. They could see the flame flickering in the lantern, and after a few hours it just completely disappeared. Another one he told me was about his dad, my great-grandpa and his dad, my great-great-grandpa, fishing with another father and son one night on the North Fork of the Kentucky River. They did this about once a week around midnight. Not sure why midnight, maybe better fishing? Anyway, they were heading back to town, upriver, and they started hearing a funeral hymn approaching. They stopped the boat on the riverbank and said that the boat was floating towards them with nothing but an old hickory casket in it. Sat there in amazement and scared to death. He said he could have reached out and touched it. That's how close it was. The other father and son said, "Well, I think that's sign for us to get home." I don't think they ever went fishing at night again. I've got several other stories that happened to me, and Eastern Kentucky certainly has a vast amount of paranormal activity if you look in the right places. When I was 18, I moved into a first-floor apartment with my best friend. The house is the last one on the street, and it borders woods to the left side of it, and a very large cemetery in the back. Literally, the backyard was separated by a foot-high rock wall that instantly turns into the tombstone area. Neither of us thought much of it when we moved in because we were 18 and didn't believe in ghosts. So the first month it started to feel strange. I don't know how to describe it, but I hated being there alone, and I was never that way before. I always felt that need to turn around and see if something was following me. Then, strange things would happen. Tiny things turned up missing and would reappear in odd places. I once walked into my bedroom and found a pair of sunglasses centered on the floor of the room, and my dog, this little chihuahua, and started barking and growling at nothing, maybe at a wall or something. It sounds like nothing, but he never acted that way before. It would scare the life out of me. I spoke to my friend, and turns out it's the same thing for her. It continues on like this for a while, until one day my friend calls me late at night, and said that she'd been laying in bed trying to fall asleep, when she started to think about a deceased family member, and her vanity mirror light turned on, which had never ever happened before. It just popped on. So, main creepy thing that happened to me. I was eating dinner one night in the kitchen area, which faced away from the living room and front door. I was watching Netflix on my iPad, when out of nowhere, I felt ridiculously out of control, like my entire world had shifted. It was like this hysterical panic. After a few moments, my dog, who was in the kitchen with me, starts barking and growling at the front door area. He's going absolutely insane, and I'm still freaking out. I started bawling and calling my friend, asking her to come home. I then shut the door between the kitchen area and the living room, with my dog in the kitchen with me. I'm not more than a minute into the phone call when I hear a huge crash in the living room. I never left the kitchen area, and I continued to just cry on the phone until my friend and her boyfriend at the time got home. This didn't really change when they arrived. I was still extremely upset. After a bit, my friend tells me that the lamp, which had been on the shelf by the front door, had been smashed into the middle of the room. The lamp was a hefty, Tiffany-style lamp that weighed a good amount and had been plugged into the wall. When I went out and looked, the lamp had moved at least 3 feet away and was smashed, as she stated, in the middle of the room. The next day, my mum brought over some sage, and we just burnt it along the walls and rooms. Per Google, my friend and I kind of talked out loud to the ghosts. We assumed they were from the cemetery. We had emailed our landlord explaining the circumstances and told him we would be moving out. But immediately after that incident, things got better. It's so difficult to explain. I didn't feel alone per se, but I didn't feel any panic either. I didn't have that weird dread from before. We had a few incidents after that, which I won't go into. None of it made us feel unsafe. It just was acknowledgement that there was 100% something paranormal going on. We lived there for 4.5 years, and I still miss that place. But when I tell my friend about it now, I can never fully explain that feeling that came over me that night, how abrupt and terrifying it was. I'm not an emotional person, and nothing will ever come close to that again. I live in Ottawa, Ontario, and work for myself as a residential HVAC installer. One winter in the late 2000s, I had a job in the downtown area, reconfiguring some ductwork in a very large 3-story house that was undergoing a full renovation. I estimate the job to be about a day's work and schedule accordingly. The day of that job, however, I overslept and showed up late in the morning. The contractor who hired me greeted me with a sarcastic "good afternoon" in reference to my late arrival. The house had pretty much been gutted down to the studs, and there were several tradesmen working in various parts of the house. My work was on the 2nd floor, so I made a few trips to bring all my tools from the van and got to work. As is often the case, the work turned out to be more involved than I had expected, so I knew I had to work fast or I was going to be there all night. I became very focused on my work, and after a while noticed the lights go out, as one of the work crews, maybe the plumbers, were leaving. They said something about there only being one extension cord I could use for power, as there were no outlets anywhere. I absent-mindedly thanked them but stayed focused on the work, relying on the natural light spilling in through the windows. At some point later on, I noticed the natural light was getting dim, so I started thinking I would need to get out my trouble light soon. A little while after that, I noticed it seemed to be a little quiet, so I stopped working and looked around. I couldn't see anyone or hear any voices, but I had the distinct feeling that there was still someone around. The time had come to plug in my trouble light, so I went over to where the extension cord was and plugged in. Then I listened for noises downstairs but heard nothing. I checked the time on my phone, and it was after 5 p.m. I walked up to a window at the front of the house and looked down at the big laneway, which seemed very far down from this towering house. Aside from my van, it was empty. Being wintertime, it was now pretty much dark out. It was one of those dreary, cloudy winter evenings. Wind was blowing a light dusting of snow in the front of the streetlights. There wasn't anyone to be seen on the street. In that moment of realization that I was alone in the house, that feeling I had of someone being around instantly intensified into a very strong feeling that someone was definitely on the 2nd floor, watching me through the bare studded walls. The hair stood up on the back of my neck and arms, and I turned around and saw no one. I had one trouble light lighting the floor with all my tools spread all over the place. I had about an hour and a half left of work to do, and I often work by myself in empty houses, and in the evenings, and I'm a large guy that doesn't scare easily. The bottom line was, despite that feeling of being watched, I had to put on my big boy pants, so to speak, to get the job done. I've never put ductwork together faster in my life. I just tried to block out my emotions and work. As I worked, and as the night got darker around me, that presence intensified. It definitely felt malevolent, and after a while it seemed to be coming from every direction, especially the stairs leading to the 3rd floor. It seemed quite angry that I was here. I was afraid to focus my attention on anything around me for fear of actually seeing or hearing something to go with that presence. To have to finish my work and clean up my tools under that angry, oppressive presence was horrible. By the time I packed up, then started bringing my tools downstairs, it almost felt like it was chasing me out of the house. The last thing I had to do, and the hardest, was to make that last trip back up to get my final load of tools. Before I pulled out of the parking lot, I looked up at the house and it seemed to be glaring at me. I've had paranormal encounters before, and I couldn't discern whether this was just demonic in nature or a very angry ghost. I remember thinking as I drove away, God help whomever was moving into that house, and in future, I should try to avoid sleeping late. My whole life, my mother has told me snippets from her childhood. From what I've learned from her, my father, and eavesdropping on family conversations, my mother had a terrible childhood. My grandfather was an abusive junkie who left her home alone for days at a time. It wasn't until she was 17 she was able to escape. In her mid-20s, she met my father and they got married. They tried for years to have children, but had been told they would never be able to. Then on March 26th, 2001, my grandmother had an overdose in what is now my parents' bedroom. We don't know if it was accidental or purposeful, but they believe it was an accident. The next day, the 27th, was the date put on her death certificate. Exactly 1 year later, my parents had their first child, me. Growing up, I didn't know anything about my grandmother besides her name. That is until one day I was in the 4th grade, going through our home library. I come across a book and am instantly drawn to it. The book is a law book. I liked books so much that I took it to school the next day to read. That is when I decided I wanted to become a lawyer, and I plan on starting college next year to pursue that dream. The reason I'm telling you this is because I would find out later that the book had belonged to my grandmother, and at one point in time she herself had been in law school but never graduated. There's always been small coincidences such as these that have made me feel connected to her, as if she was still here now. This is where things begin to get weird. For as long as I can remember, I hear things at night in the attic and walls. The obvious answer would be animals, but I've heard animal sounds in the attic before. Scratching, scampering, squeaking, but that's not what I hear. It's thuds, heavy things being moved about. High heels was very common when I was younger. My sister and I have bedrooms on one side of the house and my parents on the other. For years, my sister and I have been complaining about these noises, but my parents have never been able to find anything or hear anything themselves. Everything I've told you so far is interesting, but I didn't consider it enough to share. But things have been getting weirder lately, and I've become genuinely concerned. Personally, I've always believed in spirits, and that there may be one in this house. But I never had anything besides noises and feelings to back it up. That is until a few weeks ago. I was having a bad day. So bad, in fact, I was sitting on my bed sobbing. This may seem dramatic, but I felt the need to open my arms wide and release my emotions. And that was the first time it happened. I heard something, and I looked up. The cords on my fan were swinging back and forth rapidly. My fan wasn't on, and my arms weren't long enough to reach the cords. I even tried to stretch and touch them from where I was sitting, but I was at least 2 to 3 feet away from even being close. Now to the reason I'm sharing this. About half hour ago, I'm sitting on my bed watching a show when I heard a noise. I look up, and only one of the cords was moving, and fast. My fan wasn't on. I put my hands around the cords to feel if maybe air had done that, although it doesn't explain how only one would be moving without the others being affected. I'm honestly very freaked out, and would appreciate any thoughts and suggestions. Some members of my family built a house in the country back in the early 90s. Strangely, there had historically been houses previously there which had burned down. I don't know if anyone passed in either, but I have my suspicions. As they were building the house, a neighbor approached and plainly told them that their house was going to burn down. It was the first thing anyone ever said to them about their house. The house still does exist and they still live there, but there have always been some weird happenings in the house. The mother was studying for a college test and heard a ball bouncing against the wall in one of the children's rooms. She called for the child to stop throwing the ball, forgetting that they were at school. As she did so, the ball rolled down the bedroom hallway towards the living room and into her line of sight. She was alone in the house. The boy and I were once in his basement room, and we saw the face of something human-like, but completely dull and lifeless in the storm window. The little 18-inch tall window at the ceiling in some basement rooms. There's no way the face could have been there because the storm window is only 18 inches deep and the face was oriented normally. Sleeping in this house is like a real nightmare. As a child, I would feel things brushing my arms and legs when I slept. There was this awful Mrs. Beasley doll that the mother had, that I swear would follow you with its head as you walked around. This all started when I was living in military housing. I was between 11 to 13. My brother and I slept in the same room because I was scared to sleep by myself at the time. I would sleep on a futon by the door, and he would sleep on his bed in the back corner. During the time living there, he would tell me that when he went to sleep, he would wake up, not being able to move, and would see a shadow figure just standing there or moving around watching him. But I didn't think it was anything, because he has sleep paralysis every now and then. One night I was sleeping over at a friend's house, and when I came back the next day, we were in a Skype call playing Team Fortress 2. He told me that night, when I was sleeping over at a friend's, he heard my mum, dad, and myself call him when he was showering. Still, I didn't put too much thought into it. After a while, my father's friend wanted to take care of his 2 dogs for a month, as he was going on a vacation. During that time it was summer, so my whole family's sleep schedule was ruined one night by my brother, father, and mother, as they were walking the dogs around the block. And I was in my brother's room playing BO2 Zombies, when suddenly the door started to open slowly. It's like those paranormal videos online when they slowly open. I thought it was the wind at first, so I closed the door and locked it. When I went back to the game, it opened again and unlocked. I was freaked out at this point and closed the door and made sure to hear it click to guarantee myself it had indeed been closed all the way. I locked it and gave it a pull. It didn't open. So again, I decided to sit down and resume playing. And when I looked back, I think whatever it was probably angry. And not long after, the door burst open like someone had kicked it open, and I just felt like there was a demon or a monster coming to kill me. So I ran downstairs out of the house to the neighbors in the middle of the night, ringing their doorbell, but no one answered, and I started crying in the middle of the street until my family returned from their walk. My mother got tired of us talking about this thing and called my grandma, who's very religious and spoke in a completely different language that no one understands while deep in prayer, and she goes to other people's homes to cleanse them. My mum told her everything, so my grandma went on a 20-day fast with only water, and when she was ready, which was when we were back in school, she told them to take us to school and come back, and to call her. I honestly didn't know that she knew much, but when they were on the phone, she said to go to the kid's closet and that it's in there. So my mom opened it and started to pray out loud with my grandma on speaker, telling it to go away. Then she says it went downstairs to the kitchen corner, and she tells my mom to open the door and let it out. She does just that, and it's gone. And we haven't had an experience like that again. Years later, I asked her about it, and she told me the whole story, and it was actually there much earlier than I thought. I don't even remember, but my brother and I would say, we don't like eating at the kitchen table because there's a guy in the corner staring at us. And just before everything, There was a whole flock of crows flying above our house in circles. That day that she opened the door and let it out, she could hear a squeal like an animal or a pig, and again the crows were back, but this time they were flying away. My grandma said it was the spirit of death wanting to take one of us and to destroy the family. So crazy to me. Also, throughout that whole time, my dad got cancer. My mom was suicidal and had a knife on her throat in front of us, and they were going to get divorced. My dad was discharged for the Navy for sleepwalking and taking something from a store at the barracks. Eventually, everything got better. Now I'm a junior in high school and so grateful to my grandma for helping out. I live in North Carolina, in a once small county. I moved to the United States from Mexico in 2008 and moved into a really small cramped house that had 2 bedrooms and a bathroom, a kitchen and living room. Well, we pretty much started from zero, since we'd only just arrived to the US. It was me and my mum and dad and 5 other siblings, 3 brothers and 2 sisters. I was the youngest. We didn't have much. My 3 brothers and I shared a room while my parents and 2 sisters stayed in another room. One night I had to go to the toilet, so I got up and went to the bathroom. The bathroom was next to my parents' room. I heard something fall when I was in mid-piss. I thought nothing of it, since I had a lot of siblings and simply assumed it was one of them. After I was finished with my business, I washed my hands and decided to check who made that noise. As I walked into the room, I saw my sister was awake and looking in the corner of the wall like if someone was staring back at her. I thought it was so weird, so I asked what she was doing. She didn't answer me, and so I said, "Hey, I'm talking to you." Then she snapped out of her mind and looked at me with a really scared face. I was going to ask what happened, and then she started screaming for my mum. I got scared and jumped to my parents' bed. They woke up and asked what was going on. I said I didn't know. They told me to return to bed. After I'd left the room and stayed outside the door to listen to what they were talking about, I could hear my sister crying and telling my parents she saw a woman in a black dress. She said the woman was standing beside 2 children who looked to be burned. My parents told her it was just a dream and to go back to sleep. But she said that she wasn't sleeping when it happened. It was at that precise moment my parents looked at each other with fear painted on their faces. To try and appease her, they told my sister to lay down with them. So she did. I went to bed after, and a few days later my sister began screaming again. She woke up everyone in the house, claiming the lady was trying to grab her. All my siblings were confused. "What woman?" they asked. She said she saw the same woman from before, but this time she had tried to grab her. She said that she had woken up to use the bathroom when she saw the children on the opposite corner. Then the lady came from the hallway. She screamed as she approached her, but she wasn't walking, she was floating. As her hand was approaching my sister, all 3 of them suddenly vanished. My parents told her that she needed to stop making stuff up, but my sister insisted she was telling the truth. My mother at that point got very nervous and scared, because reading my sister's facial expressions, she could tell it wasn't a lie. She then told her to sleep with them, and the next day my mother called a local priest to bless the house. After that, the activity went down, and my sister didn't see the lady anymore. Well, one day, a pipe under the house broke, so my dad had to go into the crawl space to replace the pipe. He told all of my brothers to go down there with him to help, so we all followed. What we found still haunts me to this day. As soon as I stepped into the crawl space, I got a chill. I saw a lot of candles all over the place. They were red and they were black. I asked my dad why they were here. He replied saying they were probably just old candles that people didn't need. My brother called my dad and told him that he found a lot of books. My father said that that was nice and to take him outside to see what kind of books they were. So my dad fixed up the pipe and left the crawl space. At that point, my brother comes up to him and asks him what are all the drawings on the book. He takes a look at the books and sees what can only be described as rituals. He then tells us to drop the books and go inside to get my mother. At that point, they talk about it, and I think they confirm that they were wicked, perhaps even demonic or witchcraft books. My mum then tells him to gather them up and set them on fire, which he does by pouring gasoline all over them. At that point, they start wondering if it's related perhaps in any way to what my sister had been seeing. We try to put it to the back of our minds though, go in and eat dinner, and then watch TV. But that same night, we hear my sister screaming. I hear my parents tell her what was going on, and she said the lady was really angry that they burnt her books. My sister and parents stayed up the rest of the night, and the next day they went to church to ask the priest what it could be. The priest said the house was cursed, and that we should move out. And my parents began looking right away for a new house to move into. Jose came back home. My sister told them that she was in the bathroom and she saw the lady appear out of thin air, and then apparently the lady asked for a favor. She said that the lady wanted my dad to open the chimney and clean it out. It was so late my parents called my uncle to tell him if he could come over the next day, to which he agreed. The next day when my uncle did come over, they proceeded to open the chimney up that was previously closed with bricks, and wasn't sure as they opened the bottom, they found nothing. So they decided to open the top where smoke comes out, and as soon as they did, the wind almost knocked my dad off the ladder. He thought it was strange but brushed it off, and when they finished, they found bones and ash. My dad got really scared at that point. He put the bricks back and went to the store and bought concrete and sealed the chimney off. My dad and uncle went inside and drank some beers. And my uncle offered my dad some space in his house while they found a house to move into. The next day, we packed up and left. Some time after that, my dad got a house that we moved into, and everything went back to normal. And my sister, fortunately, stopped seeing the lady. This next event happened 2 or 3 years after we moved. My dad decided to move us to a bigger house, which seemed normal. On one night, my sister awoke and saw a black shadow on the side of her bed. She thought it was just her imagination, so she tried to fall back asleep. But the next day she told my parents, and they just assumed she was tired. A week after, my brother started seeing stuff too. He claimed he saw multiple shadows in his bedroom, and eventually my brother started ignoring the shadows. Then one night he woke up and saw a shadow right in front of him and another one by the door. The shadow then started whispering, but my brother couldn't make out any words. He then started praying, and the shadow vanished. When he went to my parents' room to tell them what happened, they told him he was tired and that it was all in his imagination. So my brother returned to his room to sleep, and never saw anything afterwards. A few years passed and my sisters moved out, and one day my sister came to visit and had to use the bathroom. So she went to my parents' room to use theirs since the others were occupied. She was doing her business when all of a sudden she got goosebumps, looked next to her and claimed she saw the Grim Reaper and started screaming, and my parents heard her screams. My parents ran to the bathroom and asked her what happened, and they found her on the floor crying. My sister said the Grim Reaper tried to take her. She then showed my parents her arm, and there were 3 scratch marks on it. She then left, and didn't return for a few more weeks for another visit. This final experience is my own. One summer day I was sleeping in my bed, and awoke as I had to use the bathroom. As I went to use it, I came back and felt a strange vibe in my room, so turned off the air conditioner and just stood in the doorway. Then the bed all of a sudden began shaking uncontrollably. I got scared and ran to my parents' room. My dad was on a business trip and wasn't in town, so I jumped on the bed and awoke my mum and told her what was going on. My mum told me to stop playing games and return to sleep. I told her that I wasn't playing a game and that we should go check on the bed. We both sat there quietly, listening, and she could hear my bed shaking. We started praying, and a few seconds later the bed stopped. I was so scared I asked my mum if I could sleep with her, and she agreed, and I fell asleep in her arms. The next day my mum sprayed some holy water all over the room, and since then I've had no further experiences. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. Haunted houses are always fun. If you enjoyed today's video, you know what to do, and I'd be grateful if you did it. I feel pretty good about myself. Cleaned up the office, it's looking pretty nice. Hasn't looked this nice in a while. I am still considering painting triangles all over the wall. I just think it will look nice. You see, I have a little triangle rug. All nice little coloured, perfectly symmetrical triangles. Some purple, some grey, some blue, some green, some white. It's a lovely rug. And I thought it would just match the wall. So yeah, we might be doing that in the following days to keep ourselves busy. And it would just look nice. A bit different from the usual white walls. Alright then guys. I think for now, it's time for me to sign off. Stay safe. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.